The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human needs and the unreasonable silence of the world, says Albert Camus in The Myth of Sisyphus. The human call for meaning is met with silence in a meaningless world. We yearn for love, and yet the world does not dispense of its goods fairly or equally. We are deluged by reality TV and dating shows that sell us the dream of love and lust. We are buffeted by apps that promise to bring this dream into reality, and what emerges from this onslaught is a tension between the societal expectation that we all deserve love and the reality that many of us will never experience it. The Black Pill philosophy, in a crass and caustic manner, seeks to express a fundamental truth. One's chances of finding love are largely predetermined by their genes, their socialisation, and the systemic inequalities that underpin the dating market. A man is either desirable or he is not, and no amount of human agency or self-growth, according to this philosophy, can improve his lot. Indeed, as Christopher Ingram reported, the number of men younger than 30 reporting no female sexual partners since turning 18 has tripled since 2008. Moreover, the share of young adults reporting no sexual partners in the last year was 10% higher among men than women. According to the Black Pill philosophy, this is due to a principle called hypergamy, the tendency for women to select male partners that have a higher social status than themselves, leaving the least desirable men without anyone to date. In the face of such a reality, many incels, involuntary celibates, turn to suicidal ideation, proclaiming that it is all over, that they should lay down and rot, or that they should rope. For many young men, the dating world represents an existential crisis, that they are fundamentally unworthy people destined to live out an existence of suffering and singledom. However, according to perhaps the most prominent existential philosopher, Jean-Paul Sartre, our being is fundamentally free. As Sartre writes, there are no pre-traced paths that we must follow in life, but rather our being, the being of the subject, or what Sartre called being for itself, is ultimately the being of freedom, whereas the being of an object, the being of every rock and crashing wave, is determined by its own facticity and follows a set path determined by its own physical and factual composition. As Sartre remarks, I am perpetually choosing myself, and I can never be described as having been chosen, or I would collapse back into the pure and simple existence of the in itself. The subject's freedom is therefore to transcend its facticity, its factual circumstances, by negating its being in itself and becoming more than its mere situation. As a flower's being is the mere composition of soil and sunlight, the being of the individual is not simply rooted in its own facticity, in its past, its environment or its psychology, but is free to act in light of its situation. Indeed, Sartre invites one to imagine that they have undergone an excursion with some friends. After several hours of walking, they grow weary, and eventually one's fatigue becomes oppressive. At first, I resist, and then suddenly, I let myself go. I give in. As Sartre notes, it is I who gives in, because fatigue in itself cannot induce my decision. Rather, it is the individual who places a value upon their fatigue, and it is only in reflection that our fatigue can appear to us as bearable or intolerable. By giving into their fatigue, the individual constitutes what Sartre calls a particular valorization of facticity, and in giving up we frame our choice as if it were no choice at all, as if we'd merely collapsed to the ground. But for Sartre, we're always choosing who we are, and it is the facticity of the world that frames what choices we make. Indeed, the experienced hiker, in light of their own projects, their own goals, may see their fatigue as the very reason to continue onwards and to push themselves beyond what they have achieved before. As Confucius remarks in a conversation with Shun on whether virtue is in the reach of everyone, he writes, someone whose strength is genuinely insufficient collapses somewhere along the way. As for you, you deliberately draw the line. Similarly, Richard Moran, in his book Iris Murdoch and Existentialism, likens the individual's freedom to their body posture, writing, one is always in some position or another, whether standing, sitting down, leaning against, or whatever. The individual is always free to move and has other postures available to them. They are said to be making a choice, even if it is to leave their posture alone. The body cannot avoid being in one posture or another, whether to sit up or slouch down in one seat, one's posture always emanates to one degree or another the individual's will or disinterest, their insistence or insouciance. To be in bad faith, then, is to fundamentally misconstrue our freedom and to see ourselves as an object determined by its own facticity and not as a subject that can act in light of its own facticity. While incels are often far too pessimistic about their own dating potential, clearly Sartre takes an optimistic view of human nature. For some of us, taking pride in our appearance and seeking self-growth could be the difference between finding love and not. But for many of the least desirable men and women, they have to confront an often neglected reality that we do not all deserve or should expect to find love, even if the ideal of love is sold to us en masse. What Sartre's key insight alludes to is that there is no necessary relationship between the facts of the world and the meaning we derive from them. To assume that there is just a perverse coping mechanism, but incels are coping with something, and we cannot anymore wave away the facts of the dating world than we can assume that such facts must entail a bleak and meaningless existence. In a world of dating apps and social media, the dating market is becoming increasingly tilted towards an Instagram generation of the young and beautiful, as dating options become ever more plentiful for desirable men and women. But for the ordinary and even below average looking people among us, companionship, love and sex may become increasingly more difficult to attain as dating app algorithms exacerbate the human tendency to seek ever greater beauty, status and excitement. But it's only the individual who can define what the world means to them. It is left to each of us to reconcile what the human need for love means in the face of an indifferent world. If you've liked this video and want to see more videos on how philosophy can help us study society, then please share, subscribe and like the video. Thank you.